one of the skills in bullet points is understanding the global infrastructure. And if you go into the global infrastructure, this does give you a basis or an understanding on the resources that are available for you to use. When we do jump into an account, you'll see that you can go and choose different regions to be a part of. But what does all of that mean, right? So really quickly, Coach, drawing our attention to the screen here, basically you got to know where the computers are that you'll be connecting to, right? That might relate to network connectivity, that might relate to service availability. There's a lot of things that you need to consider here. And as I look at this blog post, there's three rectangles here. This first rectangle says 34 launch regions, and I'm just going to scroll down until we get to this nice map that AWS has created for us. And as I'm looking at this visualization here, I'll see that there are some green dots, and these green dots talk about regions that are already here. As you're creating architecture, you'll be choosing to deploy that architecture in one area or another. Now, if you hover over, let's say this green dot, this was the first region that was ever created. It's called US East 1. Another name for this region is Northern Virginia. It happened in 2006. So if you want to launch an application to reach a population that's on the east side of the US, then this might be a good region to go for. Now, there is a collection of data centers here, but there's a better term for us to define a collection of data centers. And it's actually already on the screen. I'm looking at Northern Virginia as the title of the region. And it has 6 availability zones. Now, availability zones is a concept that we need to dive into. Because if we go back here to domain 1 of the exam guide, it tells you that you need to understand highly available architecture. The way that you really understand highly available architecture is you wrap your minds around regions, you wrap your minds around availability zones, and you understand what it means to deploy into separate areas of the world. And that is going to keep your applications more available. There could be a network outage, there could be a power outage. And so if that thing happens in one area, you want to make sure your application is also deployed in another area so you can keep things flowing for your customers who are going to access your applications. And for those of you who might not be in a role to utilize these services just yet and you're just upscaling, this is a huge concept that you need to get down. If someone is building out an application, we don't want to see it in just one place of the world because you're at risk of not having it to be available. Right. So as we go back to the global infrastructure of things, we'll see that we can use 6 availability zones. And again, all an availability zone is a collection of data centers. And this collection of data centers is a great distance away from another collection of data centers in that same region. That way, you have an opportunity, again, to keep them separate. Right. That's the basis of having some highly available architecture, but there's more to pull out of this. As we go through week by week, we'll start to look at an application that is highly available. And this is a concept that can be enforced by a service called elastic load balancing, creating some elasticity. All that means is once I start getting connections into my application, I'll have an opportunity to send that traffic to one place or another, right? Keeping myself highly available. If you're out there and you have no experience with AWS, you're going to have an opportunity to build out an AWS account, right? How do you do that? I think a quick way to do that is just to search these 3 words: AWS Management Console. And when you do that, you'll get this page here pop up and you'll start to create for yourself an account. Through that process, you'll give an email address, and this email address will become what we call a root user of an account. So I'll just pop up an account here, but Charisma, I don't know if you have some additional info around root users.
Yeah, I would say safeguard your root user is what I would say. So when we say the word root user, we're talking about someone who has complete admin access. Usually it's that email that you initially create your account with that you want to safeguard. Think about putting it behind a virtual lock and key, if you want to think about that from a visual perspective. And you only use that account when you need to do things that a root user is needed for. You want to immediately create a separate account for your administrative items or your just personal day-to-day use, but you never want to use your root account, which is not just a login ID and number. It's usually the email address or the full account number. That's usually the identifier there as we're thinking about the root user.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it more perfect myself. And now that we have an account, now that you're logged into this root user, just like Charisma said, you got to do something about that. You need to have another way of accessing your account so you don't have as much power as that root user. And so there's a service that you can tap into to get that done. So if you're at this point now, you have some account, there's a few things that we want to point out. On the top right of your screen, you got a My Account button. You can dive into that button there to change some general settings about your account. What might be your default region into your account, let's say. And now that we're talking about regions, we just showed you the global infrastructure. So how do you choose a region? How do you get involved with choosing that? You can choose the region button here, right on the top right side. And so now if I hit this drop down, I'll clearly see that if I start to deploy compute, if I start to deploy some storage options, I'll have an opportunity to store or deploy that into this area of the world.